It's because I don't think there's anything on the.
Or is it not loading on Canvas?
Well, no, I downloaded the things in, but you have to, because usually when you go to dashboard, it shows up. Oh, now it shows up. Just
Yeah,
kidding.
sorry, it took a little bit. I tried to activate it sooner, but I had to add some tools into the notes.
Oh, yeah.
So let's give everybody a couple minutes. You can download the notes in the assignment. We're going to do that today. So we'll talk about analysis today. At least it's not too hot outside anymore, huh? It's nice now.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
So Chris, how's your B&B doing? Is it picking up now that things are opening again, or?
No, actually, last month, June, I had someone trash it, so I'm
Oh
repairing
no.
it. Yeah, I'm repairing it right now. So we're in the process. But no, yeah, it's been tough. I,
Oh, because of the protests that happened? Is that what
yeah,
happened? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So yeah, it's been tough, but we'll figure it out.
Mm. Okay, so right now I think we only got a few of us. Hopefully they'll be able to join us in a little bit. So we are going to go over chapter 2 or unit 2 in the forensic process. So if you can, sorry, I activated my module kind of late. I had to modify some of the tools on the list. The book gave you some tools, but the tools that I've added to the list is also contained in your notes. So if you can download chapter 2 notes, and then we'll go over the questions. We have about 20 questions today. I know this is such a small class, so we'll see who's going to come in today. All right, so I'll walk you through some of the explanation because this is part of our project as well, is to be able to also look at data and then take the findings and put it into your report. This could be what you will be doing in an organization, or if you work for government agency, it's important that you understand the procedures. So I'm going to start screen sharing. So in chapter 2, it starts with talking about the analysis process, which is very important along with the, the final area. So we want to be able to build information from our evidence, and we want to approach it when we want to prove that that individual or the accused or suspect is going to be innocent for most of the law enforcement case. So what this allow us to do is, if we have the process in place, you're going to be efficiently plan everything out. So number one, you need to have a process in place that's going to have you think about what kind of things that you're going to be doing, what kind of tools you're going to need, what kind of preparation you're going to need, so you don't waste time. And time is resource, so that means it could be money. And also you're not going in circle all the time. Okay, are you guys able to access the notes? It should be up right here. I see it's linking. Okay.
Now we do.
Okay, all right. So you want to make sure that you have valid results from the tools, and we'll talk about how we can do tool validation today, and I'll introduce you to some of the tools that's available. So the first thing is that we need to take a look at some of the components in the process. So in the first question, it asks you about how can you conduct efficient investigation? We need to use reliable and effective tools. There are many tools that are available, even the ones that company would purchase. But if it's not reliable and or it could be disproved or thrown out in court, then we won't be able to use what we gathered as evidence. Second thing that you need to incorporate is a detail-oriented strategy and to be able to critically think through the process, meaning that we would need to have a process in place that's going to address all the details in that case. And we have to have the knowledge and the capability to be able to conduct, because every case is going to be different, especially for digital forensics. So even if you're investigating multi-cases that are related to mobile devices, right? It could have different OS, it could have different content as far as data. It could be that there's other factors that would be involved in that in such case. So two things that you need to focus in is reliability and effective tools. And you need to make sure that you have different strategies and to critically think your way through. So if one doesn't work, you have to work your way around it. Okay. Now, the process consists of 5 subsets. Number 1, to determine necessary tool and budget and people. So your resources need to be available. So before you investigate, you got to make sure that you have the right tool. You might have some tools in the tool set that might not be adequate for the current case. So we want to make sure that we research the appropriate tool and obtain the appropriate tool. And some will be commercialized and many of them are open source. And so I'll introduce you to some of the open source one. Then second subset is some of the legal issues, right? Some of the new laws or changes in the regulation. So we want to address the understanding of the case information and the legal issues outside of determining and preparing, okay? And then the third area, and then we'll go into this a little bit more, is to understand the data acquisition process. How to be able to obtain data. So if we're looking at distribution of child pornography, that will be different than, you know, committing fraud via email, right? And how to obtain, and we want to be able to obtain images and then document the system that we're working with. And then for the fourth area is to understand analysis process, right? To dig into it a little bit more to really know whether if you're looking at the network investigation versus system investigation, and how to interpret your findings and different areas of your findings into your report, which is the last subset. Report your findings. So in the reporting, you have to put together a document that's going to contain executive summary, table of content first, executive summary, and then list all your artifacts, right, and evidence and findings, and including, you know, system state, all of those things. Kind of like what we did with the reporting for the lab last week, but a little bit more detail in the larger scale for some of the bigger investigation. Okay, so these are some of the subsets. So I'm going to get into I already talked a little bit about the pre-investigation. So let's talk about your equipment. Now, the general aspect is that, yes, we're going to need a computer, and what kind of computer we're going to need. Right? Most of the time, if you are a contractor, you're going to have to supply the majority of your own equipment, unless the company have some equipment available, but you would assume that they don't. So the example that the author used is at minimal, we want to use one of the faster later processor. We want to have a system that would have a decent amount of RAM. So we're looking at about 32 gig, because there are a lot of software tool that you're going to use, and then you're going to work with images that would require RAMs, likely virtual machines and images that you pull, that you copy from the investigated system. You also need drives, and they recommend solid state drives because solid state drive is going to give you better throughput. Okay, so you need to use fast performance processor and high throughput storage, meaning RAM and hard drive. Whether you're using internal or external, and then external, you got to document who actually has access to the system physically, right? Or the storage devices physically. So in the textbook, it only give you, I think the first one, the Tolino system. Now I'm gonna open this so you can see the price tag of this and the specification. So Sumori is one of the mainstream brand that you often see that forensic people go to. And yes, you can build your own system to be able to do this, but some of these would have proper physical and logical equipment that comes equipped. So this is the type of laptop that you would see, and it runs about 5,000. So if you're looking at a pretty beefy gaming laptop, that's equivalent to that. Okay. Now you want to have also graphic adapter that's going to be powerful. So in case when you're working with, you know, virtual systems, right, like images, you want to be able to utilize VRAM and process that and your GPU. Okay. Now this one has its own 8 gig of DDR6, which is great. And most of the time you want a system that would have its own graphic card like this. Okay. And so here it gives you a little bit more of the description. It has solid state drive and regular hard disk drive. So you want to have multi-disk. You want to have decent smart battery pack. Also, you know, enough to equip. So a lot of the time we care a lot about storage because that's what we work with all the time, is to be able to have that storage available, because you don't want to be short of it. Where if you, let's say that you need to take, you know, 50 images and be able to pull it and put it on your drive, copy of the images, right? So you can investigate, and it takes time to go through. So you want to make sure, along with running applications. Okay, so this is kind of like a general idea of what that system would look like. And then if you look at the other links, I provided the other links here. So digital intelligence also sell, and some would carry, like, you know, so you can take a look at their hardware a little bit more. So here's the workstation for Summary. Okay. So at this point, what we see is we work with high-end systems. And then if you work for the government, likely that you will be issued a system if you become a field forensic person, right? The investigator. So you can take a look at the other brand here, right? Now, some would have the case like this, the majority of them do. And if you're looking at the kit, and later on the author actually talks about the kit. The kit is nice because it allows you to bring this to rugged environment, right? Travel. And then in some cases you would have encryption tools. So when it goes through TSA scan, they cannot see the content of what's on your system. Because, you know, exposure that can create, you know, privacy and other issues. So we want to make sure that we maintain integrity and privacy for the data there. So you want a case for the kit like this, right? Airtight, crush-proof case. And then you want additional components. So we'll talk about some of the tools. So that kind of gives you an idea of what that would look like. Any question? So the computer itself is going to run $5,000 to $7,000. That's why, and this is what we see with, you know, and or it could be more, right? Sometime that you would have additional machines in the kit where you would do more analysis with drives for data recovery and such. Then it can go 20,000 or even higher. With the response kit, something that you can add, and maybe you can start thinking about, maybe if I wanted to do this as a contract, how can I put together a system that would be like this, right? Or what kind of tools that I would use. So response kit, you would have a digital camera, right? And digital camera might sound outdated, but you don't want to use your own personal phone for this. So you want to dedicate a camera, right, that would use a separate or multiple SD cards so you can record video and take picture. You would use latex or disposable gloves because we don't want to tamper the evidence. Sometimes you will have to touch the system and fingerprint might be lifted from that system, so we want to make sure that we use gloves. Notepads to be able to record information, document actions on the scene. So you need to write down every step that you go through and your observation. Then we also need paperwork, which is going to be some that would relate to evidence, sometime that would tie to, reports, sometime that would tie to authorization. So we want to make sure that the paperwork comes in handy. And we're pretty good at digitally managing this now through forms and different type of applications. However, many organizations still revert back to hard copy. So you want to make sure that you have a folder or something to maintain that. Then you would have bags for drives and components. So for example, if you're collecting smartphones, you want to be able to protect that. So we would put components and systems into storage bags or containers. Sometimes it will be plastic containers. And you would use tag and label to make sure that you properly document these systems and components. Okay. So for my project, I think I have some of the evidence bag, and eventually you guys will have to pick up some of these components and tools. So we want to make sure that you know the process, and we want to mock it and be able to do that. And then there are times that you will go onto the cloud and be able to pull stuff. So we'll do some of that as part of our project. So with storage and media, we're looking at SSD and USB, or it could be RAM, right? So we want to get the log files, right? Evaluate the log files along with the physical components. So you are looking at data that could be on RAM, hard drive, SD, or any storage devices, okay? So we want to have storage media that's going to be able to allow you to collect the data set from the image, from the log files, from RAM, and so forth. Then you can also get write blocking devices, and these are USB equipped. And there's a link for that there. So you can get the actual physical, and then they have software tool that you can use as well. We want frequency shielding material because people will remotely wipe their devices. So they recommend using foil, battery bags. There would be container, and now they do sell sleeves and bags, right, that you can insert the devices so that way it will block radio transmission. Or sometime that they would have an actual device to block everything else. So there are numerous ways that we can do this. So we're going to block frequency, so that way in the case if they're using smartphone, they can wipe smartphone, tablet, even laptop by remotely accessing it. So we want to block signal there. Okay, so that will be one. And then your toolkit, physical toolkit, like small screwdriver or screwdrivers for different sizes. and then possibly, you know, additional pliers and things to cut cable and so forth. And we want to have extra power cables, data cable, USB hub, screws. And then one of the things that they recommend is your network tap, which looks like a very small hub or switch that you can buy. And they range from 30 to 100 and something dollars. So you can plug one cable in, and then some of the tap actually allows you to plug in the cable onto the rack itself. So it all depends on the type of network tap that you would need. So you would start with the basic, and then you can acquire additional tool as you go along. So they say that for portability, we should get forensic laptop, and then also you want encryption tool, whether it's going to be the drive, like a USB drive, or you would use the software tool for that. Because like, as I mentioned, when we travel, TSA would scan and they would read into, or sometime, you know, there's inspection and you don't want people to look into your investigated data. Okay, so after our subsets, you can get into some of the tools. So I had mentioned them already: workstation, laptop, encryption, security keys, some of the things that can go into your toolkit: gloves, camera, notepads, paperwork, screwdrivers, storage media, etc. And you want to have a case to protect some of these components and also your system. And then ultimately, we should have forensic software and pre-install and test it. So after you install, you should open it up and test it first to make sure it's working, understand how it works, learn how it works. That's part of the pre-investigation process. Okay. Any question? And we would find this in our notes. I just summarize it. So now, when you work as an intern, when you do intern for places that does forensic, they don't necessarily provide everything. So you might see that, you know, in some cases where you go with an investigator into the field, you might have to have your own, you know, additional cable or things like that. If you don't have it in hand, you might not be able to access a certain type of system. So this is why it's important to have a decent toolkit. Okay, any question? So here we talk about the physical tools that we want to prepare ourselves with, and you want to be able to use these tools, right? So if you have a set of software that you install, you want to check it out, attend proper training. Now, the book mentioned some important things, and I think it's really good to recognize, right? Some people would have certification and they might not be able to do the job even though they have the certification. Certification does not mean that they're capable of doing it, okay? Now, some people, they do have certification and they're capable, and you want to be those people. And certifications help you land a job or the promotion or get you into a specific area of investigation, right? That's important, okay? But it doesn't always guarantee that you're going to be able to land a job or even know what you're going to be doing, because there are many institutions that train for certification in boot camp and such, right? And they briefly go over it so that way you can at least have a knowledge of that concept to pass the test, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you could do it. So I encourage you to be able to use like software tools, and if you have the devices, to be able to explore it and practice it and be good at it, because just like everything else, you have to use it more than once in order to get better, okay? Because every software is going to be different. There's different features. Every case is going to be different. So if you're familiar with your tools, right, it won't be so difficult going through the process. Okay. So these are some of the tools that you need. Now, you don't have to have everything, but this is what is recommended. Okay. Now, the author dropped in a link, and I thought that was kind of cool. It's a way that you can set up your devices. Let's say that you wanted to be able to remotely store things. And it's good that we cloud things now, that we put it, but again, you got to evaluate the contract. Like they advise against cloud because if it's not fully private, right? And that company can also obtain your data information. But if it's privately owned, let's say if your company have a cloud, then you would be able to back some of that stuff there, the network drives and things like that, but you want to make sure that you protect access to that. Okay, so this is a link to where you would be able to access your devices remotely, and it goes from smart storage in smartphone all the way to USB that's connected to a certain system. So it will be able to connect via the network, and then that way you can use that storage space for storing the data image that you need. Okay, so that will be an option. Now let's talk about forensic software. Never use pirated software because it doesn't stand in court, and it violates work ethic or our technical ethic and what we believe in security and as technical professionals. So we don't use pirated software. You can use open source and commercial software. Okay. Our commercial software, of course, we have to pay, and some can go from $50 all the way to thousands of dollars. It all depends, and sometimes they will charge you per license, so per user. Sometimes it will be an institution license where you would pay $7,000, and you can have so many people using it simultaneously, right? Some software they won't allow simultaneous use, so it all depends. But here I give you some additional information along with the textbook information. So autopsy is very common. This is open source, and you might come across autopsy if you do a little bit of research on software tool. SIFT is also common. So when you're looking for work, you might see some of the job description as the requirement is, you have to be able to know this type of software or these type of tools. Okay, so as you use these, I want you to document and then update your resume. You might not be an expert in this. Nobody's really an expert in this unless they have like 20, 30 years using such tool, right? But I want you to have, you can list the software and you can have knowledgeable, and these are the software tool in the forensic. And always categorize that on your resume, and that would help. Okay, so additional suite here, and you can find the link to them and you can download and practice, and I would recommend using virtual machine with it. And some OS image like Kali comes with some forensic tool, right? And Parrot comes with some forensic tool. So there's different virtual machine that you can use already that has some of the forensic tool, but you can add. And there are a lot of tools that are Windows based because they understand that many people in the forensic industry work for government, and government uses Windows environment. But there are some tools that will be for Linux. So we have Kane, and some of these, some of the commercial one you can actually certify for with the vendor. Okay. And then encrypt this detector. It should be detector. I have a typo there. So if we have encrypted this, we can also use specific software for that. So you should always have a set, right? We would overlap some of the tools, even though it does the same thing. You want to use multiple tools to examine that system image, that RAM, etc. Because when it goes into the legal area, if you have multiple tools, you can say that both of or three of these tools gonna give you the same finding, and likely that would be accurate. So some of you probably have heard of Wireshark, and Wireshark is used for network analyzer, and it's also used for investigating network. Then you have magnet RAM capture. So in whether it's malware or whether it's breach, in some cases we have to go and we have to take a look at, you know, what's happening in RAM, in the physical memory. Okay, so that's how you can actually capture artifacts using RAM. Network Miner we did in the lab, and Network Miner allows you to examine the PCAP file, which is a captured file, right? A file that contains a capture snapshot of the network at that time. Nmap is also popular, also known as Nmap for Linux, right? In Kali, this doesn't have a graphical user interface, so it's known as, you know, it's also called Nmap, but Zenmap produced it originally. In Windows, you have a little bit more graphical user interface, so you can download it there. It's great because it actually maps out, right, the network, and also it gives you the OS information. It's a good auditing tool. So it's a very active, like many of these, right? After the fact, we investigate. So we are auditing the system. So there's additional resources here, right? Like as I mentioned earlier, you can have a USB write blocker. This is a software tool, or if you don't have the actual hardware tool, then you can view USB drives without leaving fingerprint, because when we open up a USB drive and we start looking at the file, it actually changed the file state, and you don't want that. So you want write block type of tools, so that way it doesn't modify the original file. It keeps it intact, but we can still see what it is, right? What's in the file, what's the size, what's the content. And some are better than others in giving you, you know, the type of file and what's really inside that content, okay? So here is the link for the write blocker. And then if you're evaluating websites, right, FAW is great. They've been around for a little bit. So this allows you to capture, and you should use it with Wireshark because that ties back to web server and web traffic. So FAW should always be used with Wireshark or some kind of capture tool. Okay. Any question? Okay. So there are more on, and if you can find that link there, and you can find us also, there are the other website that lists, but I found that website to list some of the most open source tools, so you can look and possibly see what's compatible with your system. If you want to use it, you can download it and examine. Some simple things like maybe if you have an old computer and you want to examine the RAM of that computer or a USB, and you can practice on your own to get better. Next is the commercial software. Xways is also popular. NCase and FTK been used by, you know, government and law enforcement for a long time. FTK and NCase actually does their own certification in digital forensic. So if you get really good at that suite, you can also certify, and you're knowledgeable, and you can also get books and tutorial to be able to learn it. Okay. A little bit more costly than, you know, most of other software. And then you have FEX, Forensic Explorer. So there are quite a few, and even the ones that produce open source, they also have a version, a pro version, or some kind of release that they would commercialize to make money. Like Belkasoft, they do that. So they have the Evidence Center. Now the commercialized software is better because it would be supported, right? There will be updates, right? And, you know, graphical user interface might be a little bit easier to use. Learning curve is less. You might have, you can communicate with their support team in case you run into a problem. However, open source, you have variations. You have a lot of developers produce these open source tool, and they are just as good. It might lack some features, or so you might have to use multiple tool. Okay, and then for Mac you can use Blacklight, Recon Lab, and then Linux you can use Smart. Okay, so now let's get into the area that's a little gray, in that even if you use these tools to find the evidence and you get findings across multiple tools, it might not stand in court. In such case, you have to explain your procedures in finding reliable results. Because if the software is not proven to be a scientific software, it can be thrown out, right? So that won't stand a chance in court. Okay, and then even for the investigator, if this person doesn't have the credibility, right? And a lot of the times they pin back to credential, experience, and such. So even if the investigator is not adequate, right, whatever that person find will not stand in court as well. So that will be the note, and it talks about the work standard. So it's a way that we would go through the legal, administrative, judicial process to produce reliable results, or show that we did. Okay. So what I want you to do is identify the type of software that you use in forensic investigation. We can use open source and commercial, both. And you know, some people, they would prefer to use mostly open source, right? Or if you work for a company and they choose to use commercialized, then you have to use commercialized software. In the next question, it says explain how software can be used in court. You have to explain how it would produce reliable results, and you have to explain the steps of that. So refer to software documentation, and then looking at your procedures on how you find the reliable results, how you do the comparison to statistic analysis based on that. Some software tool will give you the report in statistic and some don't. So in the next question, it asks you, how can you really validate this then? So the industry had decided that we need to find a way to really say that this is what is considered to be standard in validation of any media tools. Okay, so in your notes, after it talks about how we would validate, how we would specify the steps for court use, it goes into NIST, and NIST is, you know, if you take security class, you're going to hear NIST all the time, and SANS, and you know, some of these organizations. So NIST, what they did was they had all these entities, NSA and some of the government agency and the larger people that would contribute to this kind of like a repository. And on the website, you would find that here is the tool on how you can test your program and your media. Okay, so I'll open that up so you can see. So general information, and then your technical information, like in the specific, this imaging, media preparations, write blocks. So every single thing that we're using, we really have to refer to this and see if it can be validated, right? So let's say that if we're looking at like drive protections, here it tells you the result for specific ones, okay? And then you can also add the report. So find the information and add the reports there, okay? So, and this is managed by Homeland Security. So there you go. Now, to answer 6, we know that we would use NIST Forensic Tool Testing Project, your CFTT. And if you like, you can include the website, but that's on your notes already. So when you choose a software, you gotta make sure that it can be validated, or it was, right? And so that way you're not going in circle. Let's say you use it and it's not gonna hold in court, then we have to go back to square one again. So now for 7, I want you to choose 3 from the list. So I chose autopsy, SIFT, some of the ones that the book has selected, but Paladin, Kane, and you can add more to that. So we want to also have like a range of software. We would have a good software toolkit, right? You would want to use this for this, and set one for write block and one for RAM and so forth. Now, some of the suite, it would address all of it, right? But we wanted to have multiple type of software so we can prove that they're the same in findings, or a very small margin of difference. Any question? Okay. Then next, we're going to choose 3 commercial forensic software: X-Ways, FTK, NKs, Blacklight, Smart, whatever you like there. Meaning we have to pay for these, right? And yes, we don't want to use pirated ones. So even if you see, you can find trial versions for sure. A lot of them would have like different trial versions. So you can have it for 30 days or 10 days, 15 days. So you can examine it. And then after that, you're going to have to pay. So as I mentioned, we want to use multiple tools so that way we can validate our findings. So in the conclusion, right, in the report, we can say, here's the findings, the result, right? And then in the conclusion, you can say that because it was found by this tool, and this tool to match, then, you know, and then this is the recommendation, or this is what we need to do. Any question regarding selecting your tools, making sure we use multiple tools and validate our tools? There are other websites too that it does the comparison for you. It'll tell you the commercial and the non-commercial tools, and it tells you which one is compliant. So you can find those websites. You can say, okay, so this is compliant, but this is not compliant, right? I've seen some of those as well. So, but be careful with those because they work, you know, they make money from advertising these software. So sometimes you have additional resources that will come with the software that's free. Okay. All right. So we're halfway there. We're almost done. We're going to go through the next half. This is fairly pretty, you know, simple. It has a lot of, you know, just applying some common senses, I think. But at least you have the resources for the tools now, and you have some information about this. All right, so as I mentioned earlier about training and certifications, right? So certification doesn't always mean that that person can do it. It just shows that they met their minimum requirement for that certification. Usually it's an exam. And so by practice, by hands-on, by using it, that's going to get you more knowledgeable, more comfortable with certain tools and the procedure. So you can also join organization, right? Like I know that GIAC has ways that you can join, and some cases you have to pass the test in order to get a membership with them. So here are some resources for this. As I mentioned, InCase does it. Access Data also certified for their own product. And then you have International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists. Now, eConsole certified. So with Certiport that's coming in September and October, we are obtaining the institutional license. Certiport actually certified for the associate level of this. Because if you look into like computer hacking forensic, forensic investigation technician, you would see that they require some experience. So the associate level just means that you passed the test, you got the certification, but it's not a full certification until you show that you have the experience. And this is the same way as some like CISSP and SSP, right? A lot of my former students, they test for it and before they obtain this experience, so they got the associate level, and then what they do is as they work in the companies, they could show that they have 3 or more years experience, then they get the full certification stating that. So it's like a sub certification under the larger umbrella. But eConsole does ethical hacking, and they are very expensive. So hopefully after this class with Certiport, you can sit for the associate forensic certification, and then that way you can have it on your resume. Yeah, I couldn't get them to get vouchers separately for students, so I have to find ways to get institution license because we have obligations to how we use the funding when it comes from state and federal. All right, so GIAC, this is a common one as well. And I think I put many of these links in your course resources, but it's here also. Okay. So there are different forensic certification with GIAC, and many government agencies accept these. So, and they even have like training that relates to some of these. Okay. All right. So we're going to move forward. We're going to talk about understanding case information and legal requirements. So the things that you need to ask is, what is the nature of the investigation? What is the nature of this case, right? Is it a fraud case? Is it a breach? What is the nature of this case? So that's the start. Then from there, you're going to branch off and say, okay, this is the type of case that we're working with. Then this is the type of evidence that we're going to need to find. Then we can narrow down to the type of system that we would look at, right? And the type of devices that we would examine, the type of artifacts that we would handle. Next is our legal justification. So in law enforcement, they would use search warrant and also consent. Now in private entity, in corporate, right, their ownership is going to really determine the extent of that search or that examination. Okay. Now, you know, the gray areas, bring your own devices, right? But we talked last week about the expectation of privacy, and that's important. Then we can also narrow down on who's the subject, who are the suspect, and what role do they play in this investigation. Because then we would have to interview, get some information, and then document. So some of the questions we need to ask: why was the item seized? Okay, first we ask what kind of item, right? And then we say, why is the item seized? What kind of evidence is contained in these, right? Is it criminal activity, or is it something to prove that they're not guilty? Is there a chain of custody for this item? There should always be a chain of custody, but sometimes you might see things that fail. How many people have access to it so far, right? That chain of custody allows us to document who has their hands on it or who's seen it, right? Who accessed it. Where was it found? Was it in a secure location? Was there a date, time stamp, or reference? And we'll talk about date, time too. And what's the focus? Do you need findings? And when do you need it? Okay. So in the next question, question 10, it says, what kind of questions do you need to ask to further understand the investigation? We need to ask, what's the nature of it? What's the expectation of the crime scene? What's the legal justification? Why? Do we need consent? Do we need a search warrant? Do we need authorization from owners? Who are the subjects and the suspect, and what role do they play? Now, to document this is going to help you put together your final report, right? If you start writing down the questions and the answers as you go, you can quickly put together the report instead of going back. You have to review the video of the interview. So I think the process is going to really span out. It's going to be easier if you properly document things and write down things. Okay, so before we go to volatile system, do you have any other questions or any question for me at all? Okay. Okay, so let's talk about data acquisition. So now we're going to get into the data, right? So first we talk about, oh, this is the type of system that we need to get. Now we need to really look at these systems and what kind of data is involved. Things that are volatile, meaning that data might not retain when something is modified, when you remove power, right? When you disconnect it from a network, it changed. And you need to make sure that if it does, we want to document it before, right? We want to record it. We want to take picture of it. Okay. So live systems that are connected to the network or the larger network, servers, right? In the case, if you watch the video for the discussion of Cloudflare, right? They investigated that. Government investigated their case. So in that case, they're looking at that web host server that's, and then the data that's involved with the case. So live systems that are running, systems that are on, network, right? Network appliances, things that are connecting, communicating, switches, routers, right? IDS, ICS, IPS, all of those things, you need to make sure that you document what is happening before you make any changes. Because when we start disconnecting them and take them to the facility, that changes everything. Okay. Is it virtual? If it's virtual, it's also volatile. And then ultimately the physical system, right? Because data could change as soon as you open it. So what you need to do is you first need to take image, and there are software tools that you would use to pull images from systems. So it takes a snapshot, not a backup, a snapshot of kind of like how you do, you go back and you revert back to the state. So it takes a snapshot of your system at that state, okay, with all the application, all the file and everything. And we want to have multiple copies of it, and we would only evaluate the copy, not the system itself. So we would take image of these systems, and then we also write down or document the steps of evaluation of that system. So that way, you know, when we have to testify or use it in a legal matter, we would be very clear. Then if you do try to access it, you would want to make sure that the changes does not impact the overall investigation. Okay, RAM is volatile, right? So when the system gets disconnected, all of that is gone, right? All the information is gone. So we want to make sure that we would use the proper tool to get a snapshot of what's in RAM. And for the lab this week, I'm going to try to apply some of the tools so that way you can you know, get a little bit more hands-on practice there. Okay. And in some cases, right, entity would try to destroy the system or manipulate the system. And we talked about how they want to remotely wipe. So make sure that we need to disconnect it from the remote connectivity. We also can put things in airplane mode, right? But we document and we go through like before we even start touching it. So, and that needs to be done quickly. Okay. So our goal is to analyze under the normal circumstances and not change much of the digital evidence. That's our main goal. So to answer question 11, what type of system is volatile? Live system, running system, network, virtual system, and also physical system. Then in 12, it says you're investigating a case for ABC Court, which requires examining network artifacts. What you should do to gather the evidence from the system in this network. So we want to make sure that we take photos, physical location of network systems and how it's you know, how the wires are connected, what kind of systems connecting with the other. We can also record video. And normally when you investigate, the company would actually record you anyways, right, for legal purposes. Okay. Then we want to document the steps in obtaining our network artifacts. We write down any kind of interaction procedures that we have with these network appliances and systems, or even users in some cases. We want to write down network connection information, ports, and this is why when you have tools for network like captures and things like that, that will be useful because we want to be able to document all of this too, right? Take a snapshot of it. Then we want to make images of the system and the appliances. So, you know, we don't always work with, you know, desktop or laptop. We might work with switches or router that runs iOS that has specific system settings, right? So when you're investigating attacks, you got to see where it's funneling in from, what kind of system that it, you know, that they had come across or it had penetrated. And that could simply be, you know, gateways or firewall, things like that. So we want to make sure we take images of those. And in Cisco cases, right, you have to know how to use iOS and CLI command line. but not all company uses Cisco. Other company uses Barracuda, or they could use, you know, many different brands, but Cisco is common. Any question? Nothing. Okay. Make sure that we understand chain of custody. It will be on your test and quiz. It's a way that we can document all access to evidence. Who accessed it, when it was accessed, for what purpose. And you see this in movies and television. But we would use a form, right? Like to create a track of, you know, this is the type of evidence, the list of it, and then, you know, who's accessing what at what time. So that way we can go back and see if somebody is tampering with evidence, if it's intact, how it's exchanged hands. So that's the definition for chain of custody there. And for certification, you have to know this question. This question comes up a lot. Even for security certification, it comes up as part of incident response. So before we get to the next question, you can find chain of custody on page 7. And here is a form that is used by NIST, or it's released by NIST. There's a link for it. Let me see. So it's opening this up, and then you can fill this out. So part of our project is also to complete this as well, right? We want to put our company information here, and you can use this standardized form, and you can modify it a little bit to make your own, of course. But and then companies, they might have their own. You would have a case number. This is just generally case information, and then also evidence information here. This is where you would list your item number. So the author, the way that he did it, in his experience, this is what he shows. Okay, so this is an empty form. So this is what you use to track evidence. So he would put down the item type initial and then the number. So if it's the first of its kind, right? Like for example, this is a CD/DVD. So he'll put CD-001. And then, you know, a description for what it is. And then HD is for hard drive, right? So they have 2 hard drives here, 1 DVD there, and so forth. So you can come up with a thematic way to really identify this system, or your company would, and then they would tell you this is what we would do to identify the number for the evidence. Okay, so this is a screen capture of the form. So it says that you need to make 3, or there are 3 types in creating a copy. There's the forensic copy, which is bit by bit. It's not that common now, but you don't want to add additional to that copy or cross-contaminate it. So because, you know, if in the case where we recover file, that could be changed. So forensic image is something that's used, bit by bit copy of the source device, but we store this as an image format. So even at the file extension. So it needs to be able to extract it as an image. Image files could be ISO, there's other type of file format, right? But this is commonly used, forensic image. We create it as an image file, where instead of a copy, too large and things could be different. Then we have a logical forensic image, which is only dealing with data. So instead of taking a capture of the whole system, its state and its data, we can just take a logical image where it's only going to be for data or data sets. Okay. So let's say that you are working on a case where somebody is leaking data, like design to your competitor, right? We can take a look at access logs. We can take a look at the data, type of data that was accessed, right? Then we can look at the logical forensic image. Because the logs is already stored on the network and network systems and appliances. We can look at the server already to really determine the log, but when it comes down to the actual data, we can pull the logical forensic image for that. Okay, any question? So to answer 14, you need forensic copy. You need or you can create forensic image, or you can use logical forensic image. And we talked about the difference. Make sure you know the differences for the test. Okay. And throughout our labs and exercises, you will be creating these. All right, so time zone could be in different locations physically, could be in different country, it could be in different area, right? So time zone can be challenging. We don't want to have our time zone in, being settings can modifying the system that we're investigating. So the best thing that you should do with your forensic computer and your tools is to use UTC, which is Universal Time. Okay. So it says that you should adjust any time frame where criminal activity may have occurred in UTC, so that way we can see when that is actually occurring, right, in that window of time. It could be minutes, seconds, or hours, or days, or months. And, you guys are probably familiar with the Target case, and, so there were many incidents that were tied to Target before they had replaced some of their security people and changed the way they operate. So yeah, they had snapshot of that. And the first time the attacker was in there for more than 3 months, they said between 4 to 9 months, and Target was not even aware of it. So now they claim that they have one of the best security infrastructure and so forth, but there's no such thing as the best. There's great, right? There's no perfect solution. Okay, so we touch on time, which is UTC for 15. So last week you did network miner and I had you write down the hash information, right? And so here it is. Why is this important? Why is hash important, right? Why do we care to write that down? And I mentioned that, oh yeah, it has this encryption and that encryption. So Hash it's a value numerically. It can be represented with letters and numbers. It's a digital fingerprint for a file or data. So what happens is whenever a file is modified, it would have a different value. It's kind of like this, right? I give you a number, 100. And then every time that you leave the room, you leave Zoom and you come back, you get a different number. So I would know exactly that you did leave the room or not. So if we have changes, right, the hash value would be different. Okay. So, and last week we saw in Network Miner, we were able to do the hash calculation. We saw MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256, right? So those are some of the standard cryptography algorithm that would use to have specific hash value. Okay. Now, here it explains a little bit more. It says using hash algorithm allows the use of variable to input to create a fixed length of the output. If one bit is changed, right, it causes a different output for sure. So hash is a way that we can see integrity. Okay, and that's important. So in the case of breach, you wanted to know what kind of data that they have touched, or if they actually modify your database, right? You can evaluate the hash. Okay. So now, using hash, we can verify if the evidence has or has not changed. And we can also exclude specific files. So if we want to investigate what kind of file do they modify once they enter the network, then we can exclude the ones that are not modified. The hash doesn't have, there's no difference in their hashes, right? That means that they hasn't been changed. So it can also identify the file of interest, so the change hash file. Okay, so that's important to know. And now you know why you wrote down the SHA-256 value, right? And we can use that to compare to see. And we obviously, in the Trojan case, we knew his system been modified, but we want to know which file been modified, right? It shows the file and then what other files can be impacted so we can investigate more. So here's the NIST software reference library, and this contains RDS. This helps you identify good files. Okay, so this is a good data set that tells you what is considered good files. Because even if you have the hash, what do you compare it against, right? What's considered good, what's considered bad, what's considered normal. So to answer the next question, we know that hash is important in analysis because it can help us determine if there's changes to our data. And we would use RSD to compare, or I'm sorry, I have RSD, RDS, to compare with as a large hash set to see if this file is still good or not. Okay. Any question? So this is a very brief, explanation in hash. I know that Security Plus class, some of you took it, CIS27. Last semester, we touched a little bit on hash and a little bit on cryptography as well. So this adds more into that so you can see how that can be done, used in forensic area. Okay. So for the next one. So here it goes into file signature analysis, which we want to match up the file extension with the file type. Okay. So there's unique file signature for the file extension. So we want to make sure that we match up, and it's not, they're not talking about like the file extension as the dot whatever in the file name. But in some cases you've seen, I don't know if you're familiar with the I love you virus. I love you virus was notorious using hidden file extension, right? And people see the message and they download it from their email, and that's how it spread. And it's still around. It's very old. But in some cases you do have malware, right, that would change because it seems, or it would have multiple extensions. So in the intention to do this is to make sure that the signature of the file and the file extension is matched. If it's a document, it should match with these type of files. If it's an, you know, let's say a graphic file, it should match with these type of files. So that's important. And in file signature analysis manually, or you using software suite, a lot of the time we use software tool to do this. We can look at thousands of files that way. And then we can look at the report to see what doesn't match. That will be a file, could be a file of interest. And then what matches, we can eliminate those. So here, we can state that it ensures the file extension that matches the file type for our investigation. So in many cases, our incidents would consist of malware. And one of the things that you should always do, even if you took another system image, you can scan it, right? Because it could be that they planted the malware, or it could be related to a ransomware case, whatever it is. So San Bernardino school district got impacted, I believe, a while back, right? Where they had ransomware, and it locked up many of their systems. So they went dark for like a day or almost 2 days, meaning that they couldn't access anything. And it happened on Monday, so they didn't get everything started back again until, you know, they lost some data and they rebuilt, but they didn't pay. Okay. So in that case, you should always also look at the impacted system and scan it. And the network antivirus system or anti-malware system, it should also detect it as well. But we want to scan it to see if there's additional details that we can get, or other malwares that's also at work. So in the cases with forensic, we can mount the drive where that image is stored, and we can have it scanned. There are some company that allows you to do live scan, but you gotta be careful with that because it's through the network to their system. So you want to use your tool for this to be able to scan your mounted image. Okay. So in access data, it tells you that it shows that it actually lists the file. It gives you, the cool thing is some tools, it would say that this is the type of file that you're working with. So various type of file, whether it has infection and so forth. So now if you're working as a larger case where you have to share this image with other investigator, right, across the network, you can make copies of that image, right? Or you can go to a shared image and be able to do that. A little bit of the bottleneck because it's one file, so that's why you should always make copy, and then you can examine it, and then other people would make their own copy. So you should use a copy of a copy. that's what I always advise, at least 2 copy, and you would examine a copy of the copy. Okay, any question? Okay, so to answer the next question, it says, why should you use antivirus in analyzing an image? You should use it to determine if malware is present in the image, and could have malicious intention, right? Ransomware is big right now. It just takes up a lot of the company's assets, so that's big. And then other issues like Trojan and things that were coming through, worm, etc. So we want to make sure that we use antivirus for image as well, not just the scan file, but the overall system image. Okay. Any questions regarding tools and some of the components that you would use? I know we're going to finish early because I'm coming close to the end now. And if you have questions, you can stick around. We can address it individually. Okay. So after we have our findings, we're going to have to write it up. And we did a little bit of it, like a 1-pager in Network Miner, right? But in the larger scale and also formal reporting, you would have specific and information, executive summary or summary, and so forth. So you need to make sure that you explain your findings in a way that for a non-technical person, they need to know what that is. So if you use any kind of technical terminology, you would have to have definition. Okay. And you can't just say, you know, Trojan. You have to say Trojan and what it means and behavior. So a way that if you can break it down to somebody that doesn't know anything about computer and technical, if they can read it and know, then you're doing a good job reporting. Because this can go to different groups of people. It can go to lawyers. It can go to, you know, executives. It can go to managers. So you want to make sure that it's easy to understand. And that can be challenging because even for me, a lot of the times, you know, even when I explain, sometimes I think that, oh, maybe they already know this, but we got to give it information in a way that everybody can understand. Okay. You have to make sure that you have different versions of the report. So we have to go through the revision and also think about our audience to address different group of audience. But for this class, I'm just going to have you at the end, after you find the evidence, you have your results, you would put it into a report, and that's what you submit. But you know, you don't have to make multiple versions, but ideally they want you to have different versions because you would have to send it to different people. Okay. Make sure that we have details. And avoid screen captures, things like that, because sometimes that doesn't really have any impact on the overall case, right? Because the report is really what you would find after after you completed your procedure, right? You want to put the date, the time, what it is, right? And also notes about what had occurred or what you could identify as occurring at that moment in time. Okay. So in some cases, communication between investigator and prosecutor or attorneys. Then you would have specific storage make and model, very important, right? And so for example, Western Digital, right, WD, and then you gotta write down the whole entire serial number, right, the conditions of it. If it's broken physically, cracked, damaged, you have to state that. It shows that, you know, there's an attempt in destroying that device. Or if it's normal functioning, you know, so we gotta state that. Especially if you work with people, then we want to have individuals, witness, or identifiers for the victim, suspect, etc. We want to also include the type of hardware that we use, the type of software that we use. If you use multiple software, you have to put those in. What was being examined, files, drives, networks, right? Specifics. And if you're talking networks, are you talking about network appliances, network traffic, right? Network activities, what is it? Network drives, resources. So we have to be specific. Then after that, we wanted to put it all together so that way, and it make it easy to understand. So there are many templates out there. This class, often you would see that like it would show up on bachelor, like upper division or master level, because it requires some of the, you know, at least some of the technical knowledge from the other classes as well. So when I taught this in the past, when I make them write the report, right, I find some templates for them to use, and I will be able to give you some template to use so you can add, you know, your pieces in there. But templates are just the very basic, right? It's your writing and it's your report. So you're gonna make sure that, you know, it's error-free and it's understandable. So that's important. But yeah, there are templates that you can probably find online. Okay. You can provide screenshots, but they said that try to keep it minimal, not a lot of it, because that can be very distracting and it's very difficult to go through. A lot of times they would go to evidence lists and then they would go to the finding sections and see the result there. Okay. So let's see, what else do I want? Oh, for contraband images, we want to have a separate report for that, because, you know, a lot of the time legal cases require that we have a separate thing for contraband. State the facts, include any search authority that's involved, and yeah, so list of evidence. So they said to keep it 1 or 2 pages, that's good. And especially when it goes to court. So if you have lots and lots, so if, let's say if you have 50 drives that you would go through, you can also list it, but the way you identify that is you can have it in range. Okay, so you don't have to type from like 01 to 50. Okay. Yeah, so there's, now lastly, before I finish, so after we write our report, we have to have a conclusion. This is the last part of your report. Okay, and that's the last, could be a page, sometimes it could be a chapter because it's so long, right? Now you want to be neutral with your opinion, stating the facts and the findings. Okay, make sure that there's no preconceived notions. This is sometimes could be a hard thing to do, So think of it like a research, right? You research this whole entire case. You come into it with hypotheses, and then at the end, right, you would be able to prove whether your null hypothesis, the first hypothesis is correct, or your alternate hypothesis is correct. So it's one or the other, right? So now really is that you're not proving anybody guilty or not guilty. You're just simply stating your finding and what that finding really means in general, right? Like if you have these files, these files were infected, like what we did with Network Miner with Matthew Jones' case, right? We can say that this is what happened, this is the file, this is where it's at, right? This was impacted, this was the time. The result is, this system was infected with ICE Trojan. So we have to investigate that, what kind of malware that was coming through, what kind of behavior it would have. So we would state that. Okay. All right. So the last part is the reporting of the conclusion piece, and that would wrap up your report. So that after you do data acquisition, you write up a report and you would have a conclusion. Any question? So let's see who I have here. I have Chris, Alma, David, Jufan Chen is here. We're missing a few people, but I will put you guys in for attendance for today. Okay. So I put down that for my final conclusion in my report should have narratives and lists of evidence for procedures and findings. And then for the final conclusion, that you want to provide neutral, conclusive results. And your accuracy needs to be high, right? As I explained to my Python class earlier, when I was going through my research for cybersecurity, they told me that my margin of error has to be less than 3%. And scientifically, less than 3%, even 5% is too large, it won't be accepted. So now think of it like that, right? We want to make sure that we are like 97% accurate or better. There's never a true 100% accuracy in a lot of things, because there's other factors like human error, system error, things like that. But we want to make sure that we are pretty close to the top. Okay.
We cannot submit the assignment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't click the option. Hold on. Let me stop share real quick. I might have clicked it, but I didn't save it like that. I apologize. You guys are always so fast and ahead. Okay. Let me get this edited for you. Oh yeah, I had it selected. No submission. Give me 1 second and it will change right now. Okay, so I have it as file uploads now. Okay. All right. Oh, reminder, next week, the 7th is Labor Day. No class for Monday. Okay, so if you have Python in this class, you won't see me until Wednesday. And we will do a little bit of both lecture and lab or hands-on activity together. But Monday, we won't have a session. Okay, so you would have a long weekend and that will be nice. But my Tuesday class, they're still gonna have class on Tuesday and forward. So, okay. Any question? So I haven't gotten any word from the dean about cancellation, so this class is gonna stick. They would notify me already. as we've been through 1 week. So hopefully maybe other people will join us, but it's going to be a very small class. Okay, so for this week, we're going to do lab on Wednesday, and that will take care of our week activity. That means that you should do some reading, and then the following week we will have homework assignment. So I wanted you to have a good Labor Day and not have to worry too much about your assignments. So, okay.
It's my anniversary weekend too.
Oh, really? Well, congratulations. Tell your spouse to congratulate as well. Very sweet.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right. I will be on for a little bit in case you have questions, something's not clear, you want me to re-explain something or talk to you about something, you can stay on. But have a wonderful night. It's nice outside right now. It's still light and cool. And that's it. So thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
See you Wednesday.
Okay. See you Wednesday, Chris. David, you okay? You have any questions?
Yeah, he was talking about the assignment to submit. Was he talking about the assignment that we're going to be doing for Wednesday?
Oh no, just the one that we just
just
went over. The unit 2 in class.
Oh,
the
for
one
the
that-
example. That's what I was wondering. I was like, are we going to be doing an example like that again, or if that was the example
Well,
for this?
So the unit 2 assignment is a required. I always do in-class assignment. It's this one.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because right now I'm on my phone and I need to log on my computer and do it. That way I can submit it.
That's okay. Yeah, so in the evening, the Zoom video takes a little bit longer for some reason, possibly because their server, but I will post the video as soon, so as soon as I can, I will post the video in case you need to go back, but you will find all the details from looking at the notes, which is also there in Canvas. Okay,
Oh, okay.
and
Under
also
the
your
assignments and modules.
under the modules, yes.